Okay. Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the talk on writing technical documentation with DocBook and Publican. My name is Jared Smith. I'll talk a little bit more about myself here in a minute. First, I want to just talk about the agenda here. My point this morning is not to do death by presentation. I don't want anybody to walk out of here with any serious bodily harm. So we're going to take it very informal. I do have a few slides that I want to show, but a lot of it's going to be a live demo. We're going to play a game I like to call Stump the Dummy. I'm the dummy. You try to stump me. I'm going to do a lot of live demonstrations, show some things on the command line, show some output, those sorts of things. So a lot of the things I'm going to cover is going to depend on what questions or comments that you give to me. I do like an interactive presentation, so if you're following along and you're understanding what I'm saying, nod your head up and down like this. Let's all practice. If things aren't making sense, shake your head side to side like this. Okay, that lets me know as a presenter how things are going. All right, so let's dive into the agenda here for a minute, if my clicker works. So I want to start off talking about what is DocBook, why do we use DocBook when we write technical documentation in Fedora. Talk about some of the different documentation toolkits and things along those lines. Talk about one particular toolkit that we use a lot in Fedora documentation and gets used inside of Red Hat a lot as well, called Publican. Talk about why we use Publican and how to use Publican. Dive into some demonstrations, like I said. And then we'll talk about some best practices as you're going along. Some things that will come in handy as you start writing documentation. Just briefly about me, I've been writing docs for a long time. Both in the Fedora Documentation Team. I started the Asterisk Documentation Project for the Asterisk Voice over IP project. Had a book published by O'Reilly Media. And yes, I did write it in DocBook, in DI, by hand, no GUI, no plugins, nothing like that. All by hand. So it can be done. I was a Fedora project leader a couple of years ago. Enough about me. Let's talk about you. Right now, I work for a company called Bluehost. So thanks to Bluehost for letting me come and speak. If you want a hosting company that cares about open source and gives back to open source, come talk to me later. This is not an infomercial. So I want to start off my presentation with an analogy. If you haven't noticed over the last couple of days, I tend to take my camera just about everywhere I go. I'm a little bit of a camera nut. That's my way of dealing with stress is taking photos. And in the world of photography, there's a saying that says that amateurs worry about tools, professionals worry about money, and masters worry about light. Okay? So in the world of documentation, amateurs worry about tools, professionals worry about money, and masters worry about getting the printed word on paper. Okay? So yes, we're going to spend some time today talking about tools. I'm not going to talk about money because I'm not in it for the money. But we are going to talk about trying to get beyond the tools. Yes, I'm going to show you the tools here, but we're also going to talk about kind of practices and try to get past letting the tools inhibit you from diving in and writing some code. Also this afternoon at 3 o'clock, we're going to have a documentation hack fest where we're going to spend more time hands-on and in more of a tutoring environment, helping you get up to speed and get past that phase where all these tools are getting in my way. I don't understand. I need some hand-holding. We want you to get past that point, so we'll give some more in-depth help there. All right, let's start off talking about some of the building blocks here. First of all, what is DocBook? DocBook is simply a set of XML tags that we use to describe the format of a book. It's a markup language, so I'm sure most of you have used HTML or seen XML before. It's not that much of a surprise, right? But we use human-readable XML tags to mark up technical documentation. Now, DocBook is a little bit different than some of the other markup languages out there, like Mallard, for example, or like Dita. DocBook tends to be fairly structured for books and articles. So you're going to have a book. The book is going to have chapters. The chapters are going to have sections. Sections are going to have paragraphs. Those sorts of things. It is a very linear flow through things, unlike Mallard, for example, which is much more topic-based, or Dita, which is much more topic-based. So it is fairly oriented around more technical, linear kind of documentation style. Let's look at just a quick example, kind of a bare bones minimum of what do these DocBook tags look like. So here I have a book tag, and at the end of closing book tag, we say everything between these two tags is my book. Well, what does a book have? Well, it's got to have a title, right? So there's the title. We can have a book info section that has a list of authors. Authors have a first name and a surname. There's other information you can put in there, copyright information and editors and those sorts of things as well. But just as a simple example here. Then we have a chapter tag. Here's the end of the chapter. The chapter itself has a title. And then this chapter only has a single paragraph. And that says, let's begin with a story. Once upon a time in Prague, there was a great conference. You know the rest of the story. All right? So this is the bare minimum of what a DocBook document might look like. Pretty easy to comprehend, right? We try to make the tags human readable, so at least in English they make sense. This is a chapter, this is a paragraph, not anything too surprising. It does get a little bit tricky to understand, well, where can I use a paragraph and where can't I use a paragraph? Or when do I have to have a paragraph inside the section and those sorts of things. But we'll get into that a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit about why do we use DocBook. There are several reasons why we do DocBook. How many of you have been part of an organization that believes that the best way to pass around documents and edit documents is just email a word processor file around back and forth, and you have 12 different versions, and somebody's editing this version over here, and somebody's editing this version over here? How well does that work? The silence is deafening. It doesn't, right? So what we want is something that's a plain text file. It's easy to stick in revision control, whether that's Git or Subversion or CVS or whatever your favorite revision control system is. Something that can be easily track changes from one revision to the next. We want something that's human readable, that's easier for somebody to go in if they want to and open it up in a text editor and instantly kind of have an idea of what's going on and how they can fix things. The other thing that's really nice about using these XML tags for DocBook is that we can take this XML input and convert it to a bunch of different outputs. So we can have HTML outputs. We can have everything on a single page, or you can have it say, hey, each section or each chapter gets broken up into its own individual page, what we call chunked output. Obviously, we can create very nice looking PDFs. We can create EPUBs for your ebook reader. We can create plain text. There's also a lot of other exports, LaTeX, REST, man pages, you name it. There's a lot of other ways that we can export this. And this is really nice in that we want to be able to keep our presentation layer separate from our content. So anybody here that's done web development, there's a pretty good movement over the last 5 or 6 years that you do your content in HTML and you let CSS worry about what does it look like. We're going to do that same thing in DocBook. We're going to write our content in DocBook and not worry about, okay, how do I style this paragraph or what font am I using and that sort of thing. We leave that to the presentation layer, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But what this means with DocBook is you're doing what's called semantic markup. Meaning you're not marking up what something looks like. You're not saying this is bold or this is underlined or this is in red font a little bit bigger. What you're saying is what is this action? Is this a paragraph? Is this a footnote? Is this an application name? Is this a program listing? And then the presentation layer takes care of what do those look like so they're consistent. So all your program output, your program listings look the same. All your application names look the same. All your commands, you got to type at the command line, look the same. And you're not having to sit there, oh, do I make this bold or do I change the font? That sort of thing. So we'll get into some more examples. So now that you've seen an example of a sample DocBook file on the previous slide, you have a little idea of why we use DocBook. The next question most people have is, okay, so I get it. There's a chapter tag and there's a paragraph tag. What other tags can I use and what tags should I use? So there are plenty of resources out there on the internet. Probably the most known one is one called DocBook, the definitive guide. The DocBook, if you've ever seen it, it's an O'Reilly book. It's about 550, 600 pages thick. It's all available for free online at docbook.org/TDV. And it lists probably 250 or 300 different tags that you can use. The nice thing is most people don't use anywhere near all of them. I think in my the last 10 or 12 years of using DocBook, I may have used 25 or 30 tags. There's a fairly well-used subset that gets used a lot. Then there's a lot of tags that are very infrequently used. So we'll go through these in some examples here, and show you kind of the most commonly used tags and how to get some things done. And again, then we'll play a game, like I said, called Stump the Dummy, where you guys can ask me questions, and I'll show you how I would do that in DocBook. Those sorts of things. The other thing I want to point out is, use the full potential of your editor. How many people in here use VI? Okay, how many people in here use Emacs? Oh, I'm sorry. How many people in here use gedit? That's okay, you can admit it in public. I'm going to use gedit as an example. I'm not really a gedit user, but I'm going to show that as an example. There are many plugins that you can get for your editor. Jaromir over here has written plugins for for Vim, for gedit, for Emacs. I'm waiting for Nano and Joe and Pico, so that your editor can help say, oh, these are the available tags that you can use in this situation, or auto completion of tags and some of those sorts of things. So in one of the demos I'm going to do here, I actually just this morning installed Jaromir's plugin for gedit, and I'm going to show you how you can use your editor to really help you know what.
You don't have to install it actually, it's part of gedit now.
Oh, is it part of gedit now? No, I installed it. Shows how much I know. I'm not a gedit user anyway, so. But I figured that might be a little easier for people to grok than getting into the nitty-gritty details.
I managed to get it upstream.
Okay.
So I'm happy.
Fantastic. So now you don't even have to install a plugin. Let's talk about kind of the structure of documents for a second. Many times when you're creating a DocBook document, you don't want the entire document in one file. Right? If I'm writing a 650-page book, I don't want 650 pages worth of text all at once on a single file.
Kind of a stupid question, but to your point, right? What's the common extension for DocBook?
XML.
Oh, okay.
.xml file.
So it will recognize it based on it being an XML file.
In GI, I'll show you. I'll show you what I do.
Okay.
Vim and Emacs will get it, won't.
So what we typically want to do is break up a book into different files, and to do that we use a construct called an X-include. And this is something that came out of the SGML world 15, 20 years ago, a way of including the contents of one file in another file.
30 years.
30 years ago. I'm not that old. You might be, Langdon, but I'm not that old. Okay, 30 years ago. It also makes it really easy if you want to create some different versions of your book. You can say, hey, this version A of my book includes this chapter, this chapter, this chapter, this chapter. Version B of my book includes this chapter, not that chapter, this other chapter, and DocBook will automatically take care of renumbering your chapters, renumbering your sections, renumbering your examples, all that sort of thing. Which is really, really simple. So let's look at a quick example here. And I'm going to show you what these X-includes look like, because that's probably the first scary thing you're going to see when you first get started with DocBook. So let me close that. You can see that. I'm going to make sure I can see it here on my screen as well.
So another dumb question, particularly because you brought up Signal. Does it needs to be valid XML?
It does need to be valid XML. There are both RelaxNG and what's the other XML? Validators that you can validate, say, is my XML valid, and is it well formed, and that sort of thing. And I'll show you some tools that you can use for that as well. So let's just look at an example. So I'm going to go into my Git directory here. Inside there, I have the Fedora security guide, and in the US English directory, if I look at security guide.xml, you're going to see here's my book tag. Point to it up here on the screen. So here's my book tag, and then I have all these lines that say xi include and an h reference to another file. So this is saying pull in my book information as if it were right here in this file. Pull in my preface. Pull in this chapter called Security Overview, Basic Hardening, Secure Network Encryption. Pull in all these other files and treat them as if they were part of this file. Does that make sense? And each of those could be another file that has other X-includes in there to break it up further into different subsections or those sorts of things. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's an important thing to learn when you're getting started with DocBook. Let's get back to the slides here. All right. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is the concept of entities. How many people have used a macro like in a word processor, where you have like a little snippet of text that gets expanded into something, or you press some secret, Control Shift Alt, Vulkan mind meld kind of combination, and it represents some text. We can do the same thing in DocBook. If we have some boilerplate text, like we have the name of our product, and we don't have to want to keep typing it time and time again, or if we want to change it and have different versions of our book, we just change it one place, and if that automatically flows through to the rest of the places, we use something called entities. So let me show you an example of an entity here and how they work. So again, going back to our security guides.
Entities is basically the parallel variables.
It's like a variable. If you're a developer, think of it as a variable that you can just change its value, and that value replicates through everything. So let's just open up, let's do managing users. I think that's probably got some entities in here. Okay, so you'll notice right here, we're going along in the text. This is a number of confined SE Linux users are available in ampersand product semicolon. That ampersand product semicolon is an entity. That's saying we're going to define that somewhere else and just substitute in whatever the name of the product is. The reason it was done in this particular guide is this could be the Fedora security guide, or this could be the Red Hat security guide. And you don't have to want to go through and do a search and replace every time it says Fedora and rip it out and put Red Hat back in, right?
Where are those defined? Where are those?
So those are defined. If you look at the now this file actually doesn't have it. I'll show you where it is. But you'll also see there's a product version here as well. So this could say Fedora 21, or this could say Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, those sorts of things. Those are typically stored in a file that's a .ent file. So if you look here in the same directory, you'll see that there's a security guide .ent for entities. And hey, look right there. We have our product is Fedora. We have our product version is 19. So when we built this document, it would say Fedora 19 there. If we changed that and said, Jared's Linux version 3.0, it would automatically, update that throughout the document wherever we use that.
But it can also self-reference too.
It could also self-reference.
That's interesting.
Yep. The other thing I want to teach you about entities, though, is that they do cause problems. And that's when you work with translation and translating a document to another language. Entities are not translated, so you only want to use this where that text is going to stay the same, regardless of what language the document gets translated into, which is the one drawback to entities is the translation.
There's another one, because translators usually don't know what these entities mean. They don't see it.
Right, yeah.
So
that's true. The translators don't know what those are either, so it can cause some confusion with the translators. So use entities, but use them sparingly and be careful with them when they do translate.
You can't just swap the entity file with a different language?
You can, but in the way that we do it with Publican and in the Fedora and Red Hat docs, that doesn't work. So you certainly could. If you're building your own tool chain and that sort of thing, then you certainly could. I've certainly done that before in previous careers, but Publican doesn't make that easy. So that's the very, very, just scratching the surface of DocBook and understanding just the basics of DocBook. If you want to dive more into DocBook, there's certainly plenty of examples I can show you. All the Fedora formal documentation is in DocBook. All the sources are in the Gate. You can start looking at them. Come to the presentations this afternoon, and we'll walk through more in depth on DocBook and which tags to use. And depending on how much time we have at the end of the presentation, we may dive into some more things during the Stump the W portion of the talk here as well. I want to switch gears for a minute though, and talk about tool chains. Oftentimes, when you're oftentimes when you're writing documentation, you don't want to create all these files by hand. You don't want to go through and manually, validate your DocBook code. You don't want to manually convert it to another format. You don't want to manually, go in and start worrying about how do I do, create files for translation and those sorts of things. Typically, you want to automate those sorts of things as much as possible. Back, when I first got started with DocBook, we didn't have a lot of the fancy tools that we have now. So I would typically create a make file, and I'd say make PDF, and that runs all the commands necessary to build a PDF output, or make HTML to create HTML output, or make test to go and test this. And I probably built 3 or 4 of those tool chains over the last 15 years or so. And then I found Publican and found this little tool that was built inside of Red Hat and open source, but not really marketed very well. It's kind of a well-kept secret for a lot of years. And Publican really is a pretty good tool. There's some things I really, really like about it. There's a few things that I think could be improved, but really it's a very, very useful tool. So with Publican, it makes it very easy to start a new document with a template that lets you get started very quickly, and very easily automate the things like testing your document to make sure it doesn't have any errors and is well formed, creating HTML output, creating PDF output, changing the branding, the look and feel of the documents in the presentation layer, handling translation, packaging the document up as an RPM, publishing it to a website, all those sorts of things. And the Fedora Documentation Team has been using Publican for probably about 5 years, maybe 5.5 years. And they've been really pretty happy with it. So let's see a quick demo of Publican. How does that sound? All right. So I'll go away from the slides, come back to the command line. I'm just going to go projects directory. I think I have a new directory called Flock. Nothing in that directory right now. So I'm going to say Publican create. Now, you remember earlier I said that Publican can create 2 different types of documents, either a book or an article. So let's create a book. So we're going to type this book, and we need to give it a name. Okay, say to Flock 2014 example. Say we're going to write it in English. Sorry, I can't write in Czech. Maybe next year.
I'll teach you.
So what that does is this creates basically a skeleton, a template for us that we can use to go in and start writing our document. So if we look at what it's created a new directory. That's our Flock 2014 example. If we look inside that directory, we see that there's a Publican configuration file, which we'll look at in a second here. And there's also a directory for US English, for the language in which we're writing the document. If we look at the Publican configuration file, it has some very simple configuration. What's the XML language that we're using? It's US English. What brand are we using? For now, we're going to use the common brand. We'll rebrand that in a little while and show you what that looks like. What version of DocBook are we using? In this case, we're using version 4.5. If we wanted to do DocBook 5.0, which just recently came out, but is not huge, hasn't been hugely adopted yet in the writing community, we could change that to 5.0. Or if we wanted to roll back to 4.4, we could do that to 4.5. And then our type is a book. If we wanted to change this to an article instead of a book, we could change it. Okay. There's a few other options you can put in the Publican configuration file, but it's really pretty simple configuration. If we then dive down into this US English directory, en-us, we'll see inside there we have a file called Flock 2014 example.xml. That's our main documentation file right there. We also have an entities file that goes along with it, Flock 2014 example.ent. And then in this sample configuration, it's created as a sample chapter called chapter.xml. It's created a book information section called bookinfo.xml, a file about the authors, authorgroup.xml, also a preface and a revision history. And if we go into that main Flock 2014 example.xml file, you'll notice that what it does is it has our book tag, and then it includes our book information, our preface, our chapter, and our revision history. So all that's there and ready for us to use, so we can dive right in and start writing, which is kind of nice. So how about we do that? So let's dive in just into the chapter. Okay. So here we have, you know, our chapter. Now, again, some boilerplate code at the top. We have an XML declaration just telling us, hey, this is an XML file. We have a doc type section that's just saying, hey, this is a chapter, and this is DocBook version 4.5. This is just kind of standard boilerplate code you're going to have in each of your files. So let the system know. This is a chapter. It's written in DocBook. Here's your entities file. It's saying, hey, for entities, go look at this ENT file for the entities. And then here we have our chapter tag. Here's our title of our chapter. Here's a paragraph. This is a test paragraph. Underneath that paragraph, we have a section. And it has a title and it has a paragraph. We have another section that has a title and a paragraph. And you see we started getting into a list down here in this section, the second section. So it's an ordered list, meaning it's going to be numbered, 1, 2, 3, those sorts of things. And there's the end of our section and the end of our chapter. So pretty straightforward, very simple chapter. If we wanted to add a new section to this, we could simply come up here, make a new section. What do we want the title of this section to be? Frog is awesome. Paragraph, section, end of the section. So there I've added a new section. Okay. Now we can do some various things with Publican. Now that we've made a change to our document, what's the first thing we want to try to do? How about we validate that and make sure I haven't screwed anything up too badly? We can do Publican build, and we're going to tell what formats we want it to build in. First, I'm going to do a format of test, and that says, just test things out. Don't actually build it, but test it out. Make sure.
You want to be in the previous directory.
Oh yeah, I do want to be in the previous directory. You always want to run the publican command from wherever that publican.cfg file is. And publican build formats equals test. And what languages do I want to build it in? Well, since I only have one language right here, I tell it US English. It turns on it and it processes it, and then at the end it says the DTD validation is okay. It's starting the test, it finished the test, everything looks good.
So does this work when you don't have a network connection? Does it, okay.
This is all done completely offline.
So how's it doing the DTD validation?
It's using the system.
It pulls a copy.
It pulls a copy and caches it. Yep. And I happen to have it installed on that system. Typically when you install Publican, it installs the DocBook DTD on your system. If you went in and changed the DTD definition at the top of that file, then it would pull it across the network and cache it.
Okay.
Usually uses the system version. Okay, so my document tested out okay. Should we do it in a different format? How about we create an HTML version? Sound good? We'll just say, hey, build it in HTML. It chugs on that for a second. Now it's finished. And now if we look in our directory structure here, you'll notice we now have a temp directory. So that's where it's put that output. So we go to temp. Now we have the different languages. Here's US English. There's our HTML version right there. What is up in Firefox? You can't see it because it's on the wrong screen. But there's my book. There's the title, product name. Here's comes with the legal notice. There's my preface. Here's my test chapter here. You'll notice here's this new section that I added. Frog is awesome. Jared loves to visit Frog, hang out with his friends. It looks all nice and everything. It has everything we need. It's got a table of contents. It's got a revision history.
Can you do subsections?
Oh, absolutely.
So let's say then 1.3.1 and 1.3.2 and stuff like that.
Let's do it.
Okay. And are you going to get to where it got the UI for it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So let's first of all go back in and add subsections. Okay, so in my EN/US directory, let's see. So back to US English. Add my chapter. I come down here to Jared loves to visit Prague, and we just add another section underneath it. Is that a title? What do you want this to be titled? Subsection 1. Subsection the first. How's that?
Both trips are cool.
Road trips are cool. That's a very small section, but it'll work, right? And then we can do the same thing again. Create another section, subsection, subsection the second. And maybe here we say train trips are cool too. Something like that. All right? Oops. Go up the directory, we redo our Publican build.
So it always stomps on the prior? Like you don't have to worry about wiping it out?
Yep.
There.
Firefox. And now you'll see there's our subsections. And it's taking care of the numbering and everything for us. You know, if we added another, you know, another section above this, it would automatically renumber them.
How many nested subsections are possible? At least 4 or 5?
At least 4 or 5, definitely. I've used up to 6 or 7 in a couple of really technical documents. So. It used to be that that in Fedora docs we recommended that you, instead of just using the generic section heading, to use sec 1, sec 2, sec 3, and we got away from that. So just use a section. It makes it easier to remember. Well, that's it. How about a PDF output? Since HTML looks nice, how about PDF? We'll do the same thing, except we'll say we want PDF. I'm also going to create what's called an HTML single, which is a single-page HTML document. So we'll do both of those. So now it's churning out a PDF. And it uses, there's actually 2 different PDF engines that we'll use depending on what you have installed on your system. There's a Java project that comes out of the Apache software foundation called FOP, Formatted Objects Processor. That gets you, basically goes DocBook to FOP, and then FOP to PDF. The other way to do it is using WK HTML to PDF, which comes out of WebKit. Unfortunately, you have to use a patched version of that because the folks in Brisbane at the Red Hat office that built Publican had to add some patches to make it work well for things like footnotes and page numbering and those sorts of things. So unfortunately, that requires a patched version that's not in Fedora right now. So that's a little bit different way of doing it, but then it doesn't require you using Java and sort of thing. Anyway, let's take a look at this output here. So we can, I'm just going to use the events PDF viewer on my system, and then it's in the temp directory, language PDF subdirectory, documentation.pdf. Drag that over here. Zoom out quite a bit. So, and I crashed. Yes, love it. Okay, maybe I won't zoom out. You can see, in this case, we have our cover. Here's our title page. It looks like printed documentation. There's our table of contents. You'll notice it has left and right pages, so it's like professionally, laid out, printed documentation. There's our preface that got inserted automatically. Here's our sections, subsection the first, subsection the second. You notice it also built us, say, bookmarks inside the PDF so we can jump around. If we have links, they would work internally.
The TOC is hot linked?
The TOC is hot linked, so if you go back to our table of contents and you want to say, hey, I want to go to the Prague is awesome section, and you click on it, it jumps there. It all just works.
And those headings there, those sections there, from there,
They are from the table of contents. So if I said clicked on like subsection second here, then it would jump there. Yes.
If we come to PDF, I had one really fight to find the document properties. Normally, if I work for print, I have definitely not a normal document property. So I did not find it. I wanted to use Publican for something, but
So the document properties come from your book info section. So if you put like a synopsis in your book info section, that gets put into the document properties. Some of the other things still need some work on where they come from, but that's certainly something I can help point you at.
okay.
Pretty cool, huh? So that's a quick and dirty demonstration of just how easy it is to get started with Publican, and you can see how quickly that you can really start a new document. You can start writing, testing it, building PDF output, building HTML output, those sorts of things. Questions, concerns, comments, complaints?
So where does it get the template? Like where does it get the
The branding. I promised Lane that I'd get back to branding. So do you remember in the publican.cfg file here, I said I wanted to use the common brand. So that's the standard default ugly boring branding that comes with Publican. Okay, and there's a concept of Publican brands. And so on my system, I've got the Publican, the normal Publican brand installed. I've got the Fedora branding installed. I've got the Red Hat branding installed. I've got the JBoss branding installed. And those are just RPM packages, Publican-Fedora, Publican-Red Hat, Publican-JBoss. And if I wanted to change the branding on this, let's say we want this to look more like Fedora rather than the common brand. I would just change this to say Fedora. I rebuild. I'll do HTML just for the fun of it. Now let's do PDF as well. Why not?
Yeah, do you want to show off the HTML symbol as well? Because I don't think you did.
Okay, we'll show that off as well. Oh, we got a parse error. Oh, the Bugzilla URLs are defined. I don't know where that is. I'll have to go back and look at that.
That is a new requirement of the Fedora brand package.
Is it?
Because
So you have to put that in the config?
Yeah, because there's a feedback section that allows you to click and
Oh,
report
that's
that
right.
directly.
So then I have to, it's just BZ URL, right?
Yep.
It's got to be in the other file.
It needs to be in the entity.
Oh, it needs in the entity file. Gotcha.
You can copy it from the security guide you had there, or just put something there.
Yeah. There we go. We'll just do all three at once here.
I just noticed it said something about A4 paper.
Uh-huh.
How does it know what size paper you want the PDF to be?
That's part of the brand as well. And this is one of those little nitpicky things about Publican that I don't like, because I'm a control freak and have a slight case of OCD, or CDO in alphabetical order the way it should be. But, is that the brand specifies the paper size.
Right, so you can't pass it as a flag.
You can't pass it as a flag. And I've bugged Jeff for probably the past 11 years now, at least 10 years, about doing that. I even wrote patches for Publican and submitted them, and he's like, no, that needs to be part of the brand. So in my case, what I typically do is I create the brand, a copy of the brand, and rename it like Fedora-US letter. And then I just change the brand to whichever paper size. It's kind of silly, but that's the way. Okay, so I've got this now done in the Fedora style, the Fedora brand, and if you go back to our front page now, it's got the Fedora logo. It's got a different color of blue for the headings. The copyright information and everything is now Creative Commons, because that's what we use in Fedora. So the copyright information, all that the license, all that comes with the brand as well. You'll notice that the admonitions still look the same, notes and things and warnings, those sorts of things. Here's our we want feedback section, and it should have put that Bugzilla URL.
Is there at the end of the paragraph?
For you.
Oh,
Yeah.
right there. So that came from that entity. And now, just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and change this over to the Red Hat branding, just so you can see the difference.
It's like this.
Oh, really?
Sensor.
Cool.
Change the brand to Red Hat.
So Windows page printing.
Yeah, I just tried it and it didn't work really nice.
But it's all one word, right?
Yeah.
Which Red Hat people hate.
Is there any sort of like community location for where people have built other brands?
There's not yet. I would love to see something like that. I'll put some of the ones I built up on GitHub if you want me to. I can go dig them out for you to look at. I'll show you one more command here in a second that's actually pretty helpful. Okay, so there's that. I'll show off the HTML single just to show you a little different output here. Yes, HTML single. Now you see it's that it's red. It's got the Red Hat logo, like all the headings and everything are in red. So it looks more like Red Hat documentation. Imagine that. If you want to go create your own brand, Langdon, just go create yourself, somewhere where you've got some, in your workspace, be Publican, create brand. Name.
I want someone to create me a brand.
Okay. Publican just did. So now I have this Publican Langdon directory. You could go into the ENUS directory, go into the CSS, override anything you want in the CSS, change your colors, change what links look like, change the images, so logos and those sorts of things, swap out whatever you want to do.
Was there CSS in your output though? I thought I didn't see a CSS file in the output.
It takes the CSS from the brand and
Embeds it.
incorporates it into the HTML. So if we were to go back and look at the HTML, go back to our example, the 10th output, US English, HTML single. If we look at that index.html, you notice it's pulling this CSS file from this common content directory. This common content directory comes from the brand, and that contains all the CSS and the images that brand uses.
Oh, okay.
So again, when you create a new book,
Yeah, okay, but there's an actual separate CSS file.
Yes.
It's not embedded in the HTML.
it's not embedded in it. Yep. And so basically, we've created this Publican Langdon brand, and you can actually tell Publican to now package this up, and you can either create it as a tarball or as an RPM. Then you take that to another system and say Publican brand install Langdon. They would then install that, and then you could use that as a brand.
Is this an RPM spec file over there?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you do Publican commands or command stuff, I can't remember. Oh, so you have to run Publican from a directory that has a Publican.c. All right.
There is a bug in this version. I know about it.
Okay.
It's been fixed.
Of course, it doesn't have a mandatory. Oh, it does. Good. Anyway, when with create brand, you can also remove a brand, you can install a brand, but you can also package a brand. And the Publican guide online walks you through how to create your own brand, package that up as an RPM. And change the brand. All right, we've got just a few minutes left. This is where we play Stump the Dummy. This is where you ask any other questions that you have, concerns, comments, complaints, rotten tomatoes, things you want to see in this afternoon's Hackfest workshop.
Can I see the spec file, please, for a second?
On the brand?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Roll it.
Are there any other output? What are the other output formats?
Sure. That's
Well,
great.
you can leave the spec file open. I was just gonna.
EPUB for ebook readers, which I use on the Nexus tablet all the time.
I love reading Fedora documentation on my tablet.
So EPUBs, man pages, text output, LaTeX.
It's not that.
Publican doesn't support it, but DocBook does. There's, you can even do some, DocBook even supports some oddball things like RDF and things like
How
that.
about ODT?
ODT, no. Well, there are some third-party plugins you can do to do ODT, and they even have what's called a round-trip driver, meaning you could export DocBook to ODT and then take the ODT back to DocBook.
Because Pandoc will.
Yeah,
do-
Pandoc
Yeah.
ability.
Yeah, it'll do
And
it to ODT.
in theory, those work really, really well. In practice, I've never seen it work well enough. There's just, you lose too much, because again, one of them is semantic markup. One of them is saying, this is an application name, this is a, this is a, this is an option, this is a command, this is a program listing. And the other one is saying, this is bold, this is italics, this is a different font. And they don't translate back and forth equivalently.
I think it's possible to create an RTF file.
Yes.
Was it real text file or something? Or
Rich
text.
text.
Uh-huh.
Invented, I think, by Microsoft.
Invented by Microsoft. Yep. And again, but what you're doing is you're going from a semantic markup to a presentation-based markup, and it's hard to get back to the other direction without losing all these steps.
I want to see it work with Reveal. JS.
So I would love to see that too. There is an add-on to the DocBook specifications specifically for slides. The problem with that has always been that the presentation layer is always just stuck.
Well, so I was just looking at like Pandoc or whatever. Like if you could get it to go to Markdown, there's a Markdown plugin for Reveal. Then you know,
Right.
you wouldn't. I don't know why you want to round trip it.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't want to round trip it.
I don't know. I don't know why you want to round trip any of them. But,
Right.
You know, it's,
In a previous life, when I was doing technical training, what I really wanted was a tool that I could write all my stuff in DocBook, both my slides and my course material, my labs, my student manual, all together, in DocBook, and then have it crank out. Oh, here's the lab manual, here's the student manual, here's the slides, all at the same time. If you know of any developers that would love to tackle that and help me write that, that would be great for building course. But that's another topic for another day. But yes, that would be unique. And whether we use Reveal.js or something else on the back end.
do you ever like? Is there an encyclopedia version? Like, can you have multiple books within a book?
Sure, you can have sets.
Okay. And so that's how you would do the lab stuff, for example, is like you'd have a class called Cow, and then you'd have
You'd have
6 different books.
You'd have a book called the student manual, you have a book called the lab manual, and you'd have a book called the slides. Other questions, concerns, comments, complaints?
Do you use any good plugin for VI?
Yes, talk to Yarmir. He created the most awesome, incredible plugin for VI that I've ever seen. It is absolutely amazing. So, for example, you start typing the name of an XML tag, hit tab, it'll automatically complete. You can hit Control-X, Control-O, it'll show you which tags are valid in this particular context. You can be typing a tag and then the name of an attribute, and it'll show you what attributes work with that tag. I mean, he spent a huge amount of time making the most incredible plugin, and I wish he'd shown it to me before yesterday. So.
Is it available at Fedora?
It's available on his website. I'll pull up his.
It's in GitHub.
It's in GitHub. I will put. I like it so much. I'm going to put it on screen right now, just for you guys.
Quick, let me stop the stream.
We'll also put your Bitcoin address.
Yeah. So if you go to Yarmir's GitHub account.
This looks like you.
He's got Vim snippets. He's also got the Vim DocBook. You want both of those. If you use Emacs, you can call the Mallard DocBook mode for Emacs as well. Like you said, there's gedit plugins.
There are Emacs DocBook snippets that are exactly the same as
Yep.
those for Vim
So
and for Gedit.
So yeah, all those are available there. Talk to Yarmir, he's an expert at that sort of thing. I wish I would have had these tools, 15 years ago. If there's nothing else, I want to end with just two quick slides. As we're talking about best practices, two more things. If you're writing documentation, please don't just write documentation and throw it over the wall. Come talk to us in the Fedora Documentation Team. We want to help you and help guide you along the way. And don't feel like there's this big impediment to keeping you from coming in. Yes, there's these tools that are available. They are a little complicated. Don't let that be an impediment to you going out and writing something. Jump right in, ask for help. We're always hanging out in the Fedora Docs channel. We want to help you. So don't let the tools get in the way. Again, amateurs worry about tools. Professionals worry about money. Masters worry about life. So let's focus on the life. And if anybody has any questions, my IRC handle is jsmith. My Twitter handle, jsmith. You're probably figuring this out by now. Email address, jsmith@fedoraproject.org. Thank you.
Still worried about getting shit done.